It was supposed to be a simple shortcut, one small change that the operator thought would save a few minutes. But in the world of nuclear reactors, a few minutes can cost everything. Imagine standing in front of a machine capable of harnessing the immense power of the atom, a machine that has the potential to light up entire cities or, in the wrong hands, bring about unimaginable disaster. This is where our story begins. One small decision, made by one operator, in one nuclear facility. What seemed like an innocent shortcut set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most catastrophic failures in history, forever changing the way the world viewed nuclear power. But how could such a simple mistake turn into an event that would shake the foundations of the global energy sector? Was it just a human error, or was there something deeper at play? To understand what went wrong, we have to look at the conditions inside the plant, the pressures on the operator, and the years of decisions that led up to this single moment. The operator, under immense pressure, decided to bypass a safety protocol, a seemingly minor action, something that had been done many times before without consequence. But this time, the machine didn't respond the way it was supposed to. It wasn't just a small mistake, it was the spark that ignited a disaster. Why did the operator take that shortcut? Was it fatigue, complacency, or something else? The decisions that followed would be the key to unraveling the tragedy that ensued. In the next part of the story, we will take you inside the plant and show you exactly what went wrong. But first, we want to hear from you. What do you think led the operator to make such a risky decision? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth looks into historical disasters like this one. Let's continue our journey into the next chapter of this haunting disaster. Behind every catastrophic disaster lies a series of overlooked small cracks in the system that, when combined, lead to inevitable failure. In the case of the nuclear reactor, those cracks had been forming for years. The reactor, a marvel of human engineering, was built to withstand extreme conditions and power entire cities. Yet, lurking beneath its impressive exterior were vulnerabilities, many of which had gone unnoticed or ignored by those in charge. What made the reactor so vulnerable? It wasn't just a matter of one operator's mistake, it was a combination of factors that stacked the deck against the system. Aging equipment, outdated protocols, and overworked staff had all played their part in creating a perfect storm. The design of the reactor itself had been based on assumptions that no longer held true in a rapidly evolving world of technology. As systems aged and new pressures were introduced, the reactor became a ticking time bomb, one that was only waiting for the wrong spark to set it off. One of the most critical aspects of the reactor's vulnerability was its safety systems. These systems, designed to prevent disasters, were becoming less reliable with time. But instead of addressing these issues head-on, the operators and the engineers had grown complacent. They believed that the reactor, as it stood, was safe enough. The mindset was, if it's worked this long, it will continue to work. But complacency in the world of nuclear power is dangerous. The operator was not new to the job. He had spent years working in various roles within the facility, training and learning the complexities of the reactor. Yet, despite his experience, he found himself in a high-pressure situation, one that many operators before him had faced, but unlike them, he would not be able to overcome. In times of high stress, even the most seasoned professionals can make decisions they later regret. For this operator, the pressure was overwhelming. Faced with a malfunctioning system, a ticking clock, and the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, he made a choice that would set the course for disaster. But what led him to this decision? Was it his training, or was it the unique set of circumstances he found himself in? The operator was under pressure to meet the plant's performance targets. The reactor was running at full capacity, and maintenance schedules had been delayed for weeks. The system had been operating beyond its recommended limits, and there was an overwhelming sense of urgency to keep the reactor running. This led to a dangerous mindset. Shortcuts were acceptable, even necessary, to avoid halting operations. In hindsight, the decision seemed impulsive, but it was driven by a culmination of internal and external factors. The reactor had been humming along for years, and the operator had become accustomed to making small, seemingly harmless adjustments. This time, however, the decision was different. The shortcut was not just about saving time, it was about keeping the reactor running when the world outside seemed to demand it. It was a calculated risk, one that would soon prove catastrophic. Why did he take the shortcut, knowing the potential risks? Was it a lack of foresight, or was he simply trying to maintain control over an increasingly unstable system? As we continue, we'll explore how this decision would trigger a series of events that led to the reactor's complete failure. It started as a small issue, one that seemed almost trivial in the grand scheme of things. But once the operator made his fateful decision, a chain reaction of failures began, each one compounding the last. What followed was a catastrophic breakdown that would forever change the nuclear energy industry. At first, the signs were subtle. The reactor's control systems began to behave erratically. Warning alarms rang out, but they were easily dismissed as anomalies, minor glitches in the system, the kind that operators had learned to ignore over time. After all, these types of events weren't uncommon. The reactor had experienced small disruptions before and had continued running without major incident. But this time, it was different. As the operator tried to compensate for the malfunction, the system became increasingly difficult to control. The pressure was building, and with each passing minute, the reactor was becoming more unstable. The operator, relying on his experience and knowledge, attempted to manage the situation using the same protocols he had used countless times before. But this time, those protocols were no longer enough. The reactor, which had once been a symbol of human achievement and technological prowess, was now teetering on the brink of disaster. The safety systems, designed to prevent such a meltdown, were already overwhelmed by the pressure inside. And as the operator made a desperate attempt to stabilize the reactor, he could feel the world around him slipping away. At this point, it wasn't just a malfunction anymore, it was an unfolding catastrophe. The operator's quick fix had now become a ticking time bomb. The reactor's core temperature was rising at an alarming rate, and the radiation levels inside were escalating rapidly. The operator's every move seemed to make the situation worse, as the systems buckled under the stress. Could anything have been done to stop it at this point, or was the damage already done? The next part of the story will reveal just how close the disaster came to being something even worse. As the reactor continued to fail, the reality of the disaster began to unfold, and the world watched in disbelief. The news of the nuclear meltdown spread like wildfire, sparking an immediate and widespread global response. Governments scrambled to assess the situation, while scientists and nuclear experts began to worry about the long-term environmental and human health impacts. Within hours of the incident, emergency protocols were put in place. Nearby areas were evacuated, and people were urged to stay indoors. However, the damage had already been done. The reactor's failure had released dangerous levels of radiation into the environment. It wasn't just the local population that was at risk, it was the entire region, and potentially, the world. At first, the public was told very little. The authorities, scrambling to manage the crisis, were reluctant to release full details of the event. There was a sense of confusion, panic, and secrecy. The official statement was that everything was under control, but insiders knew the truth. This was a disaster of unprecedented proportions. In the face of this crisis, countries with nuclear facilities of their own began to review their safety protocols. Other reactors, similar to the one that had failed, were immediately shut down for inspection. International organizations, including the United Nations and the World Health Organization, began to monitor radiation levels worldwide. The global community was waking up to the horrifying consequences of nuclear power gone wrong. Behind the scenes, a massive cleanup operation was underway. But it wasn't just the physical cleanup that was necessary, it was also the psychological and political fallout. The credibility of nuclear energy was severely damaged, and public opinion around the world shifted. People began to question the safety of nuclear power plants, and some even called for their complete decommissioning. The media played a huge role in shaping the public's perception of the disaster. Television broadcasts, newspaper articles, and social media were flooded with images and stories of those affected by the fallout. The workers who had risked their lives to contain the crisis, and the long-term environmental damage caused by the meltdown. What was clear, though, was that this incident had left an indelible mark on the global community. People were no longer willing to blindly trust nuclear power, and the industry would never be the same again. The fallout from the disaster would ripple through decades of energy policy, nuclear safety regulations, and public sentiment. Now, as the world reacts, we need to reflect. How did this disaster reshape the global energy conversation? Was it the beginning of the end for nuclear power, or would humanity learn from its mistakes and push forward? The immediate aftermath of the reactor failure was catastrophic, not just for the facility itself, but for the environment and the people living nearby. What began as a seemingly isolated incident quickly evolved into an environmental crisis, with far-reaching consequences for human health and the surrounding ecosystem. As radiation levels began to spike, the once thriving area around the reactor turned into a barren wasteland. The once bustling towns and villages were evacuated, but the damage was already done. The wind carried radioactive particles over vast distances, contaminating vast stretches of land. Crops withered, and the soil became tainted, unable to sustain life for decades to come. The water supplies were poisoned, and the local wildlife was decimated. What was once a fertile, lush region had turned into a radioactive desert. But it wasn't just the environment that suffered, it was the people. Those who had been exposed to the radiation, including first responders, plant workers, and residents, faced long-term health consequences. Many developed severe radiation sickness, with symptoms ranging from nausea and vomiting to hair loss and internal bleeding. The most tragic consequence, however, was the increase in cancer rates. Decades later, those affected by the fallout would continue to suffer from the lasting effects of radiation exposure. The psychological toll on the survivors was equally severe. Families were torn apart as they struggled with the uncertainty of the future. The trauma of living in a contaminated zone, away from the life they had once known, was compounded by the fear of cancer, genetic mutations, and the constant reminder of the disaster that had upended their lives. International aid poured into the affected region, but it was clear that no amount of help could undo the damage that had been done. Efforts to contain the radiation and clean up the site were met with limited success. The process of decontaminating the area would take decades, and much of the land would remain uninhabitable for generations. In the years following the disaster, the health issues continued to plague the survivors, and the emotional scars never truly healed. The global community watched, horrified, as the effects of the disaster played out in real time. It wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a warning, a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked technological power and the long-lasting effects it could have on both the environment and human health. As we continue to examine the fallout from this disaster, one question remains: could these consequences have been avoided? Could more have been done to protect the environment and the people living near the reactor? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. In the wake of the nuclear reactor disaster, the world demanded answers. The incident had shaken not only the local community, but also the global nuclear energy industry. Governments, experts, and investigative teams from across the world descended on the site to piece together what had gone wrong, what had caused the reactor to fail in such a catastrophic manner, and what could be done to ensure it never happened again. The investigation began with a sense of urgency, as there was little time to waste. Radiation levels remained dangerously high, and every minute counted. For the investigators, this was more than just a case of technical failure, it was a matter of global security. The potential for a similar disaster at another facility was all too real, and the world needed to know how to prevent it. Initial reports suggested that the failure had been caused by a combination of human error, faulty equipment, and system overload. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that there were deeper issues at play. The reactor had been designed with certain assumptions that no longer held true in the face of new technology and growing operational demands. Over time, these flaws had been ignored or downplayed by those in charge. The human factor also played a significant role in the disaster. The operator, under pressure to meet performance targets, had taken a shortcut that seemed inconsequential at the time. However, this seemingly harmless decision had triggered a series of failures that would spiral out of control. Investigators would soon learn that the decision to bypass certain safety protocols wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader culture of complacency that had developed at the plant over the years. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the disaster wasn't just about one bad decision, it was a failure of oversight at every level. The plant's management had been under pressure to keep operations running smoothly, and in their effort to avoid interruptions, they had sacrificed safety. Regulatory bodies had failed to enforce critical safety standards, and the workforce, though highly trained, had been placed in positions where they were expected to cut corners to meet the plant's goals. The findings were shocking and led to sweeping changes in how nuclear power plants would be run in the future. New safety protocols were introduced, and industry-wide reforms were implemented to ensure that such an incident would never happen again. But despite these changes, the disaster left a permanent mark on the nuclear energy industry, and trust in the safety of nuclear power would never fully recover. The impact of the reactor disaster wasn't just felt. In the immediate aftermath, the consequences of the failure would stretch far beyond the event itself, leaving a lasting legacy on nuclear energy, safety regulations, and public trust in the technology. What was once seen as the future of clean energy had now become a symbol of danger and risk, and the world would never look at nuclear power the same way again. In the years following the disaster, nuclear energy industries around the globe were forced to rethink their approach. Public opinion shifted drastically. What had been a hopeful promise of limitless, clean energy became synonymous with fear and uncertainty. Governments, once eager to expand nuclear programs, now found themselves facing intense public scrutiny and opposition. People questioned whether the benefits of nuclear power outweighed the potential risks, especially when accidents like this one could have catastrophic consequences. The disaster also brought about major changes in safety protocols and regulatory oversight. Stricter measures were introduced to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. However, the industry was left grappling with a significant dilemma: how to regain public trust in a technology that had failed so spectacularly. Many plants that were once viewed as cutting-edge became relics of a bygone era, shut down or significantly modified to meet new, higher safety standards. Yet, despite the sweeping reforms and safety advancements, the legacy of the disaster could not be erased. People continued to live in fear of what might happen if another reactor failed, and many turned to alternative energy sources. This shift led to the rise of renewable energy technologies, such as solar and wind power, which gained traction as cleaner, safer alternatives to nuclear energy. Even as the nuclear industry worked to recover, the disaster remained a cautionary tale. It served as a reminder of the dangers of underestimating risk, cutting corners, and neglecting safety protocols. The story of the reactor failure was taught in universities and safety training courses as a stark lesson in what could happen when technology is pushed beyond its limits without sufficient safeguards. But was the legacy of the disaster entirely negative? In some ways, yes. Nuclear power would never again have the same level of public support it once enjoyed. But in other ways, the tragedy helped to push the industry forward, encouraging innovation and the development of new safety technologies that would make reactors safer than ever before. As we look back on the disaster, one of the most haunting questions remains: could this catastrophe have been prevented? In the aftermath of the meltdown, experts and investigators tirelessly examined every facet of the incident, searching for the what-ifs and the alternative decisions that might have changed the outcome. The reality, however, is that the situation was far more complex than a single error or oversight. It was a confluence of systemic issues, human mistakes, and unforeseen circumstances that ultimately led to the failure. Could the operator have done something differently? While hindsight makes it easy to point out where things went wrong, the truth is that many of the operator's decisions were made in a high-stress, high-pressure environment. The reactor had been running for years without major issues, and the operator, like so many others before him, was trained to handle small malfunctions with minimal intervention. His decision to bypass certain safety protocols might have seemed like a reasonable choice at the time, especially when the plant was operating under immense pressure to meet production demands. But what if the reactor had been better maintained? The aging systems and outdated safety protocols were critical factors that contributed to the disaster. Many experts believe that if the reactor had been regularly updated and modernized, the failure might have been prevented. Altogether, regular maintenance, system upgrades, and adherence to strict safety protocols could have helped identify the vulnerabilities in the system before they became critical. What if there had been better oversight and more rigorous checks in place? Regulatory bodies and plant management had a responsibility to ensure the reactor was running safely. The system of checks and balances failed, allowing safety measures to be ignored or overlooked in favor of keeping the plant operational. Stronger regulatory framework, coupled with stricter enforcement of safety standards, might have prevented the operator from taking that fateful shortcut. But even with the best protocols and equipment in place, accidents can still happen. Human error is an unavoidable factor in any complex system, and while training can mitigate these risks, it cannot eliminate them entirely. The key takeaway from this disaster is that there must be an inherent balance between human judgment, technological capabilities, and institutional responsibility. In the wake of the disaster, the world found itself at a crossroads. The catastrophic failure of the reactor had not only left a scar on the local community, but had also profoundly altered the global conversation surrounding nuclear energy. What once seemed like an infinite source of power, capable of providing clean and efficient energy, now appeared as a dangerous gamble that could result in unthinkable consequences. Nuclear energy, once hailed as the future of energy production, became a source of fear. The disaster had shattered public trust in nuclear power. With many questioning whether the risks outweighed the benefits, governments around the world were forced to reconsider their energy policies, and in many places, nuclear plants were shut down, never to reopen. The incident left a deep psychological wound, one that would take decades to heal. But despite the growing distrust, the world could not ignore the reality. Nuclear energy had, and still has, a vital role to play in the global energy mix. The challenge, however, is clear. How can nuclear power be made safe again? What lessons can we learn from the disaster? And how can we rebuild public trust in this once promising source of energy? The future of nuclear power hinges on the lessons learned from this tragic event. Stricter regulations, improved safety measures, and more advanced technologies are now part of the nuclear industry's arsenal. Modern reactors are designed with multiple layers of safety, and many now incorporate passive safety features that automatically shut down the reactor in case of an emergency, making it less likely that human error can lead to another disaster. However, while these advancements are important, they are not a guarantee. The public remains wary, and the nuclear industry must continuously prove that it is worthy of trust. The disaster has forced a major shift in the way we think about energy assuring, in a renewed focus on renewable sources like wind and solar, which now compete with nuclear for a place in the energy future. As we look toward a future that relies more heavily on clean energy sources, one question remains: can nuclear energy ever truly be safe again, or will its dark history always loom over its potential? Will we find a way to move forward without repeating the mistakes of the past, or will the lessons of this disaster forever haunt the future of nuclear power? The world is watching, and so are we. What do you think? Is there a future for nuclear energy, or is it too dangerous to consider? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you made it to the end, make sure to like this video, leave a comment with your opinion on the future of nuclear energy, and subscribe to stay updated on more in-depth stories like this one. Don't forget to watch the next video on the screen for even more amazing tales.